Amit, thank you so much for taking time, and I enjoyed the morning session. And we all saw Slideshare, and I'll tell you my experience that for many months or years, I was not even aware that this was a India-born startup which had made such a big success story. And when we heard, we all got inspired, saying that we can also do something from India. So that was a amazing achievement for sure, and it's inspired so many other people. And thank you so much for taking time and coming out for Digital Success Summit. Give us some pointers about what are you currently doing, what is your current focus, and then we'll take it from there.
Right. So, Slideshare got acquired by LinkedIn in 2012. And I was at LinkedIn for about 3 years after that. And post my exit from LinkedIn, through a series of events, I ended up working for the government of India. And more specifically, this is part of, so I'm part of the Ministry of Electronics and IT, and MIT as it is known as. And MIT runs the Digital India program. And as part of the program, the ministry has been keen to get people from the private sector to come in and help the government build certain, large-scale, national-level infrastructure digital projects. And so that's what I've been doing for the past three and a half years. And more specifically, you might have heard of this platform called DigiLocker. And DigiLocker is an application from the government of India where, they are attempting to basically digitize the citizen records and documents and certificates. So imagine things like your, PAN, passport, Aadhaar, your school certificates and all. So the idea is to get them issued by, put them on the platform, coming directly from the government's servers, and then build a complete paperless ecosystem around it. So it's a national level, digital infrastructure, very critical project, and I have been working as the architect for that. So that takes up most of my time, and a little bit of whatever is left is for the startup ecosystem. And I love interacting with startups, obviously, and sometimes I do angel investments, but no, I would say still primarily what I've been doing is more on the government side with a little bit of time spent on the startup side.
Fantastic. And I think this is a great contribution. Being at the government level, you can contribute in a much bigger scale, and something like DigiLocker can actually change a lot of things that we do. So when a lot of startups and growing companies, they have ambitions to work with government, is it easy to work with government? Should they focus on working with government? What is your suggestion?
Yeah, I get asked that question very often. So I would say that, by definition, startups are small and, they are just growing and they don't have a lot of resources or bandwidth. That's just the reality of the situation. And while it is true that the government has immense potential, government is the biggest market, and government incidentally is the biggest buyer for any product in the country. If you just add them up, you'll see that, look at the CSD system that you have. It's the biggest buyer for FMCG products across the country, and the same holds true for most other markets as well. But unfortunately, the government's procurement norms and buying processes are not as supportive, or they were designed for a different class of companies. So in that sense, startups would find it difficult to kind of meet up to the procurement norms, and that often proves to be a challenge. And I would my advice on this front would be that if you're very early stage, then maybe it's not a great idea to focus a lot on the government from a business perspective. Right? Don't. It's probably you can look at the private sector for your primary monetization. You can have little bit of business coming from the government side, but where the government can absolutely play a huge role is like a reference customer, right? Because if you can actually showcase that you've managed to sell to the government and you have an ongoing relationship with them, and everybody knows that the government's own criterion and norms are at a certain, they're set up in a certain way. So if they have actually agreed to contract with you and buy things from you, and have any kind of a business relationship, I think that's kind of like it's a tick against your name, the way you have it on social media these days. So to my mind, think of the government as a reference customer. Try to have maybe a few projects that you can cite for others, and I'm sure you will be able to leverage that from a business perspective. But if you're early stage, I wouldn't recommend trying to do a lot of business, or have the government as the biggest buyer, and it probably is not geared up that way.
And when you started, you explained that the whole digital was very different than today. That's one part of it. What are the main things that you see as a bigger change in the digital sphere?
Oh, I think there's been like complete, upheaval, if I were to put it this way. I mean, just the internet as a phenomenon. I mean, if you compare it to 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I think the first time maybe people in India were exposed to the internet was, what comes to my mind is maybe they tried to book a ticket on IRCTC, right? That would have been probably their first attempt at doing something online. And, that has, kind of come to a stage where, I'm from Delhi, and my wife now has started buying milk and bread from a local shopping app. They kind of come in every day and they kind of do that. So you can imagine that, from something like IRCTC to something as mundane and as commonplace as buying milk and bread, now pretty much every service or every need or a want that customer has, there is a digital way to do it. Digital is a channel to kind of... So in many ways, digital is, kind of rewriting fundamental, or it's making fundamental changes to business flows. Entire industries are being reimagined. So that's on the overall, I would say, the business side. Just at a consumer level, the fact that, you now have ubiquitous internet connectivity via, these mobile devices. And now, everyone talks about the geo effect, and so that's its impact has been absolutely astounding. And, we were talking in the summit, and all of us agreed that, geo kind of marks like a watershed. There's a pre-geo phase and there's a post-geo phase. So the availability of, ubiquitous, cheap internet, the devices, mobile devices, and all kinds of devices. So, and just the internet as a phenomenon. I think so. Overall, I think 2019 we are just talking of a completely different era. And to top it all, actually, there is also a very strong entrepreneurial culture that seems to be setting in. Back when my entrepreneurial journey started in 2003, and back then, frankly, this word startup did not exist in the lexicon of most Indians. It was a very foreign word, and people understood the word business, quote unquote. And to be honest, the word business actually came with a fair degree of negative connotations, right? There were certain, imageries attached with who could do a business or who could be successful, and not all of them were very, conducive or very positive. But now,
the B school used to say MNC versus business. So if
absolutely.
You get a job in MNC or you get a job in the business.
Absolutely, and especially, business was not something that people from middle class, education-focused families at all did. But look at the entrepreneurial activity now. Most people that you will see actually had they don't have any business background. They're not coming from business families. They're coming from very education-oriented families. So that's the other societal change that I see, is that there is just far more of entrepreneurial activity. There is an acceptance of entrepreneurship as a de facto and mainstream professional thing that you could do, and so that's kind of feeding into the general growth of the internet as a phenomenon.
And so if you have to go back, since you touched about entrepreneurship and you work with a lot of startups, so if you look back, what are the things that you would have done differently with the knowledge that you have gained in the whole journey of entrepreneurship? If you would have to do things differently, what are the things that you will do it differently?
Yeah, it's said that everybody is wiser in hindsight, and you obviously can learn from your own mistakes. I think that one of my, and this might be just me, but understanding the role. So entrepreneurship is all about being experimental, failing, learning from failure, and then it's about cultivating relationships, setting up an organization, hiring people, motivating them, driving them. And I would say that my biggest learnings, or the areas that have surprised me, have actually been on the organizational side. How do you get a bunch of people to start believing in the idea behind your company or your startup? How do you motivate them? How do you take them along? I would say some of my most spectacular failures during my entrepreneurial journey actually have been in that bucket. And I kind of, took many instances for me to kind of, figure out even what is happening and then kind of, improve on that. So to your question, I would say that if I had to do this again, I'd be more watchful on that side. Because at the end of the day, the reality is that organizations run because of people, right? People are the raw material, quote unquote, for any business enterprise, and your success. And there's a little bit of a trap, I would say, is that because entrepreneurship, on the other hand, is all about I, me, myself. How can I solve this problem? How can I break through all this? And you do it initially, it kind of gets you started, it gets you originated, and then you immediately run into this problem where to scale it, just one person being the originator is actually a very bad thing, right? So that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that, and I kind of learned it the very hard way. So that's an area of building organizations and getting people in the organization to kind of be motivated and sign up for what you're doing. I would probably try to do it better than I did last time.
And since there are a lot of talented people today, if you see any person at a 21 year, 22 year, they are much more wiser than anyone who was at. I may not use the word wiser, but at least they are much more exposed, they are more knowledgeable, and thus they are much more wiser than when we were at that particular age. But at that time also, they are seeking at the advice that how can I be a better professional or better entrepreneur at this particular age. What is your advice for someone who is growing in their career? What are the things that they should be watchful of to become a kind of a balanced person or a more effective professional or entrepreneur?
So it actually again ties back to some of my experiences, and one of the things that I actually love about the internet is that it is, besides being for communication and knowledge and transactions and all that, the internet is a tremendous self-discovery platform, right? Because it just immediately gives you access to different streams of thoughts, different streams of news. You can actually tap into this, and I go back to the advent of Web 2.0, where all of these things emerge, and it immediately became clear that for any human being to be able to kind of grasp all this thing around them, there's a very important role of applications which will act as aggregators, right, and then act as filters, right? Because the information overload that that the internet throws at you, absolutely, to be able to make sense out of it, you immediately need to kind of put in these layers in front of yourself. You're absolutely aggregating, and then you're filtering, absolutely, and those kind of things. So the point being that I think the internet is a great tool for self-discovery, for understanding what your strengths are, for understanding maybe where areas of developments is needed, and then immediately getting in touch or getting connected to people who could help you do that. Right. So that's one of the beauties of the internet, and the fact that if you look at any of these latest surveys about the future of work, and I'm forgetting the actual number, but it is believed that some 40% of the white collar workforce by 2030 is going to be self-employed. Yeah. Right? If I'm getting the numbers,
yeah, it's 40%.
It's somewhere in that region. So that is a mind-boggling figure, right? Absolutely. Who would have thought of that 10 years ago? I mean, our entire economy, our all professional endeavors were geared up towards, we need to get qualified and then we need to go and work for somebody else. Now we are saying that a very significant part of, our society is actually is gearing up to work for themselves.
Right. I don't know, it's 2030 or 2020. Because I read 2020 that it was in the US statistics.
I remember. It is definitely one of the oft quoted studies, and we can look that up. But it definitely points towards a fairly paradigm shift from what we have at present.
100%.
So to your question about young professionals coming into the workforce, the combination of these two things, A, the fact that people are going to be self-employed as the projections are, and B, the fact that the internet is going to pervade even more aspects of our life, and the fact that you can actually teach yourself and learn things from the internet. So it kind of I shudder to think what work life would look like in 2035, or maybe even 10 years later. It's going to look very, very different, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I was talking to Leo. Leo had the same opinion, that because he is at 17-year-old, he said that we don't want to get a 9-to-5 job. Just tell us what needs to be done. Give us a week. We will decide our timesheet, that what we need to come, what we need to do, but we'll get the work done. So the perspective about work is getting changed in every generation.
Absolutely. And there are other trends as well. For example, look at this whole thing about asset ownership. Right. The fact is that his kind of generation, the Z generation, I mean, they will actually not try to own or buy as many houses, as many cars, as many things that we try to possess, because that generation is just going to be brought up in a very different way. So the reality is that our professional lives and even our markets, society, there's a lot of structural changes that one can expect over the next decade or so, just by virtue of the fact that the internet is now just going to pervade different aspects of our life.
Absolutely. And since the hotel is only booked for a few more hours, so I can continue and go on, but I'm sure that you have many other things to do. Just the last question, that since this is our second edition, we're doing a series called 2 Years, 2 Tips. So what are the 2 most powerful tips that you want to share with the rest of the world that can be beneficial?
Okay, so 2 tips. So let me think of it. And so a couple of things that come to my mind. And I must, as I say this, I must put out the caveat that maybe this is just me, but hope that there are others also that might see some patterns there. So one is that, and it is actually related to our conversation just now, is the fact that things are changing so fast. I think one of the ways it impacts human beings is just what I would call the planning horizon that we have for our lives. Right? When people like you and I were in college, we used to think, let's get educated, get professionally qualified, and then we are set up for our lives, right? And maybe we came to the private sector, and in the private sector people change a few jobs. And if we go back to one generation before us, our parents, a lot of them were working in the government, and they never changed jobs; they were just there. But given the way the future of work is now oriented, I think one of what it does to people is that you have to realize that the planning cycles for your career and work in general are going to be very, very shortened, right? There's probably not that much point thinking 20 years ahead or 15 years ahead. I think you should kind of be more focused on your core skills, and then be ready to say that what, I'll do this for over the next 3 or 4 years, but I also realize that there are changes around the corner that I don't know yet, and I can't predict, and there's no point trying to kind of plan my career long. So that is one of the key things that has happened to me, is that post my entrepreneurial journey, I've kind of become more short sighted in terms of my planning horizon. And I think the second thing is something that is talked about in the startup ecosystem. It's just about how you deal with failure. Is that failure is not it's not a final blot on you, but it's just kind of a stepping stone for the next attempt. Once you internalize this thought, and once you kind of it takes root in your mind in a deep way, then actually you will start approaching many things around you in your life in a different way, right? And I think that's what the entrepreneurial advent of entrepreneurialism in the society is going to immediately do. It's just going to expose people to the fact that just because you didn't fail in your first attempt, there's no reason for yourself to be downcast or say that this is the end of everything. It's just, so I think again that's going to emotionally, mentally, just the way we are kind of set up or we plan our lives, I think it's going to bring about tremendous change.
Absolutely. And I think all these points will add a lot of value to our users. And if you have any further questions, we will try to find if Amit is around, or otherwise, he's there on social media. You can anyway follow him, and I keep following him. He shares some interesting data and new knowledge, and you keep getting the knowledge out of it. Thank you so much for taking time.
Thanks a lot for having me over for the Digital Success Summit. I think it's the first time actually I've come to Kolkata for a technology or a startup event.
Wow.
And but this has been a great opportunity to interact with the community here, and thanks a lot to Windows Net Tech for this opportunity.
Absolutely. I hope you enjoyed the whole session.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.